My wife and I bought an old house. During renovations, I found a hidden room behind a layer of drywall. What we saw inside horrified us. It all started when Sarah and I finally found our house. Not an apartment, not a townhouse, but a real, standalone house somewhere in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. It was old, built around the turn of the 20th century, but solid, made of dark red brick, with a huge oak tree in the yard that had probably seen everything. And most importantly, we could afford it. The agent, Mr. Henderson, a chirpy man in a suit a size too big, called it a project for lovers. In reality, that meant the house was damned old and required a ton of work. We bought it from the heirs of some old teacher, Arthur Lawrence. They said he lived here alone until his death, a quiet, reclusive man who taught history at the local school. He died quietly, in his bed, and lay there for almost a week before the neighbors got worried. A grim backstory, but we're not superstitious. Death is a part of life, especially in houses like these. Me, Leo, I'm an engineer by training, so I saw all these quirks of old construction as a challenge. Sarah, my wife, an architect by profession, loved the house for its character. We were full of enthusiasm. The first weeks were spent clearing out the junk the heirs had left and doing a rough clean. It smelled of dust, old wood, and something else, Swedish and unpleasant, that we couldn't identify. We decided to start with the living room. The room was huge, but ugly, divided in half by a false drywall partition, obviously a later addition. It crookedly blocked a beautiful fireplace and ruined the whole geometry. I hated such half measures. Taking a sledgehammer, I enthusiastically set about destroying it. I told Sarah to step back, that there would be a lot of dust. The drywall gave way easily, revealing a wooden frame and a layer of old insulation. And as I was tearing away that insulation with a piece of board, my hand hit something solid, not brick and not a beam. I tore off another piece of the covering, and I saw a door, not an opening, but an actual door, old, massive, made of dark oak, with a black iron handle and an equally blackened keyhole. It had been walled up, built into the load-bearing wall and neatly hidden on our side by that ugly false partition. "Sarah, come here," I said, and my voice sounded strangely muffled. She came over, wiping her hands on her jeans. "What is it?" "Looks like someone really didn't want anyone going in there." We stood and looked at the door. It didn't look like a door to a utility room or an attic. It looked significant, ominous. I touched the wood. It was cold and smooth, despite the layer of dust. I tried to turn the handle. In vain. The lock was firmly bolted, and the door itself didn't budge a millimeter. "Maybe we should leave it?" Sarah suggested uncertainly. Her voice held a note of anxiety for the first time, but my curiosity was stronger. If we had started this renovation, we would see it through to the end. I brought a crowbar and a pry bar from the garage. I inserted the tip between the door and the frame and pushed. The wood creaked and groaned but didn't give way. I put my whole weight into it. Sarah stepped back even further, her face pale. With a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the house, the lock gave way. The door swung inward, opening a black maw. The same Swedish, heavy smell hit my nose, only now 1,000 times stronger. The smell of old dust, decay, and something else. Something organic and dead. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The beam of light picked out a tiny room from the darkness, no more than 2 meters long and wide. There was no window. There was nothing. The floor was wooden, creaky, and then the beam slid across the wall. I gasped. The entire opposite wall was covered in photographs, dozens of small, yellowed black and white shots. In each one was the same boy, about 7 or 8 years old, fair-haired, in short pants and a shirt, but there wasn't a single photograph where he was smiling. In all the pictures, he was terrified, to the point of tears. His eyes, huge and dark, were filled with horror. In one, he was looking somewhere off to the side, past the lens, and his face was distorted with pure fear. In another, he was sitting on the floor. This very floor, I knew it immediately, hugging his knees and looking straight at the camera with a silent reproach. In a third, he was crying, smearing dirt on his cheeks. "Leo?" Sarah's trembling voice came from the doorway. "What's in there?" I didn't answer. The beam of light lowered. In the corner of the room lay a small pile of toys, a wooden rocking horse with peeling paint, a cloth bear missing one eye, a deck of animal cards scattered on the floor. They didn't look old. They looked abandoned, as if a child had just been playing with them. And then I saw the most terrifying thing. Next to the toys stood a small stool, and on it lay a thin, cane-like stick, about a meter long, polished to a shine in the middle where one would normally hold it. My heart began to pound. This wasn't just a room, it was a cage. I stepped back out, feeling nauseous. I slammed the door shut, though it was pointless now. Sarah looked at me, and in her eyes was the same question that was swirling in my head. "Who is that boy?" she whispered. We didn't call the police. On what grounds? We found old photographs and toys in our own house. It was strange, creepy, but not criminal. Instead, we decided to dig ourselves. We started with the archives. The local library kept back issues of newspapers for the last 50 years. Sarah and I spent a whole day there, flipping through yellowed pages on microfilm, and we found it. An article from October 12th, 1987. Child missing. In the black and white photograph, the same boy was smiling. Tobias Toby Morris, 8 years old, went missing on his way home from school. He was last seen in the Pine Street area. Our house was right on Pine Street. There was more. Articles about the unsuccessful search. Suspicion fell on drifters, on neighbors. In one of the articles, a few months later, the name Arthur Lawrence, the history teacher at Toby's school, was mentioned in passing. He was involved in the case as a witness, and then as a person of interest, because he lived nearby and had left work early on the day of the disappearance. But they couldn't prove anything. There was no evidence. The case gradually faded away. Arthur Lawrence, our quiet, reclusive predecessor. "My God, Leo," Sarah looked at me in horror. "He was here, in our house, all that time. He stole him and kept him in that room." But that was only the beginning. We returned home, and I, driven by a kind of sick, unhealthy excitement, went back into that room. Now, knowing what to look for, I was more attentive. I peeled a few photographs off the wall, and under one of them, in a small niche, I found a notebook. Not Toby's diary, Arthur Lawrence's diary. It wasn't a diary in the usual sense, more of a collection of observations, cold, clinical, devoid of emotion. He kept it as a report on a pedagogical experiment. October 3rd, subject delivered to the chamber, procedure completed without complications, showed resistance, had to apply a sedative, chloroform. October 5th, subject is crying, demands mother, attempt to explain new rules unsuccessful, applied physical measure, stick, 3 strikes to palms, crying ceased. October 10th, began educational program, history, Latin, subject is unreceptive, refuses to concentrate, denial of dinner had no effect, applied sensory deprivation, locked in closet for 12 hours. November 15th, photography, subject unwilling to assume proper posture. Fear in photographs is unsatisfactory, but the only achievable result. Demonstrates weakness. I read this, and my hands grew cold. This wasn't a man. This was a machine, breaking a child's psyche. He felt no hatred or anger, only contempt for weakness and an obsession with control. The last entry was the most horrifying. December 7th. Experiment failed. Subject is not amenable to correction. Shows signs of apathy and physical decline. Further containment is pointless. Time to proceed to the final phase, liquidation and disposal. There were no dates after December 7th in the diary. Disposal. The word hung in the air of the room, heavy and mortal. We have to call the police, Leo, right now. Sarah was almost screaming, sobbing. I agreed with her, but what could they do? Lawrence was dead. There was no evidence, besides this room and the diary. No body. We were paralyzed. To report it would mean stirring up old noise, letting police, reporters, and the curious into our house, turning our sanctuary into a circus of freaks, and all for what? We didn't call the police that night. We just sat in the kitchen, in complete darkness, and were silent. The door to the living room, behind which that room gaped, was closed, but I thought I could feel that sweetish smell of decay which now hung everywhere. It had seeped into the walls, the furniture, our lungs. We tried to move on, told ourselves it was just a strange episode. I boarded up that door tightly with massive planks, as if sealing a tomb. We continued the renovation, but the enthusiasm had evaporated. The work proceeded automatically. Every blow of the hammer echoed in my temples as a reminder. The house was no longer ours. It belonged to ghosts, not mystical ones, but real, much more terrifying ones. The ghost of a little boy with frightened eyes, and the ghost of a grown man with an empty gaze and a stick in his hands. They were everywhere. Sarah changed first. She had always been strong, but now I caught her looking at me with a detached, frightened gaze. She stopped sleeping at night, said she heard creaks, not just from old floorboards, but deliberate footsteps. Not in the hallway, but right behind the wall of our bedroom, the very wall to which the room was attached. She would wake up because she thought she heard someone crying softly. I tried to calm her, to rationalize. The house is settling, Sarah. It's the wind. But deep down, I heard it too. Not crying, but silence. A silence too loud, thick, filled with horror. That room, even boarded up, was like a black hole, sucking all the life out of the house. I found myself doing strange things too. I'd stop in the middle of the staircase because I thought someone was watching me from the living room. I could sit for hours staring at that wall, expecting the planks to fall away by themselves and reveal that door. I started to hate this house, hate its dark brick, its creaky floors, its history. It wasn't a project, it was a tomb. The breaking point came 2 months later. I woke up to Sarah's scream. She was thrashing in bed, covered in tears. She had dreamed she was back in that room, small, and Tobias, now grown up, was standing over her with a knife, repeating the same thing. You let the light in. You ruined everything. That night, we sat in the kitchen, like the first time, and drank coffee, though our hands were shaking so much the cups clattered against the saucers. I can't do this anymore, Leo, she said, and her voice held no hysteria, only emptiness and tiredness. I can't breathe here. Every corner of this house reminds me of them. I'm going crazy. I looked at her and understood she was right. We weren't just scared. We were slowly dying within these walls. The house wasn't cursed. It was poisoned. Poisoned by the knowledge, the cruelty, and the madness that had forever seeped into the bricks and beams. The next morning, we called the agent, Mr. Henderson. We said our circumstances had changed and we had to sell the house. We didn't tell him about the room. We just said we didn't feel good here. We sold it for a pittance, much cheaper than we bought it. Lawrence's heirs, hearing we were selling, tried to make claims, but we gave them everything that was left of the old man, including that very diary, silently placing it in a cardboard box. We wanted nothing to do with it. A buyer was found quickly, an investor who bought real estate for resale. He wasn't interested in stories. He was only interested in the price. On the day we moved out, when the last box was loaded into the truck, I went into the empty living room for a minute. The planks on the wall looked like an unhealed scar. I stood and looked at them, and it seemed to me that from behind them I could still hear that smell, sweet, heavy, the smell of fear and death. We left. We rented a small, temporary apartment on the other side of the city. No projects, no houses with character, only standard walls, behind which you know for sure there is nothing. Sometimes I wake up at night and think I hear a creak, but it's not the creak of a door, it's a creak in my head. A scar that remained not on the house, but on us. We didn't sell the house because of a scandal or fear of justice. We sold it because it had ceased to be a home. It had become a monument to cruelty that slowly, day by day, was killing everything alive within us. And the only way to survive was to run. We simply fled, leaving behind that door we should never have opened. Story 2. Hello everyone. It's been almost 20 years, but I still can't set foot in a large furniture store. That smell of wood chips, laminate, and ready-made food from the cafeteria brings the taste of pure, animalistic fear to my mouth. I'm 31 years old, a lawyer, I have a family, but the child locked in that closet is still alive somewhere inside me. And today, after stumbling upon an old newspaper clipping, I realized I have to get this out. I was 12. My younger brother's name was Eli. He was 8. We were typical restless kids, dragged around on endless Saturday errands by our parents. That day, the destination was Mega Home, a giant 3-story temple of Swedish design and self-assembly furniture. Mom, exhausted by our whining, finally gave in when we passed the sofas for the 5th time. "All right," she sighed, stopping by another corner unit. "You can play hide and seek, but only in the furniture showrooms, no further than the kitchens, and don't go anywhere into the stockrooms or the warehouse. Understood?" We, of course, nodded eagerly, not hearing half of it. The rule was simple: only hide among the furniture. For us, this wasn't a store. It was a giant playground, a maze of rooms where no one lived. Eli was it first. I remember laughing as I ran deeper inside, away from the familiar living room sets. I needed the most reliable, the most epic hiding spot. I passed the children's bedrooms department, went through the maze of kitchens with their shiny fronts, and ended up in a zone that seemed the most remote: organization and storage. It was quieter and more deserted here. Shelving units with boxes, storage ottomans, and of course, wardrobes. Dozens of wardrobes of all sizes. My gaze fell on a tall 2-door Malm wardrobe in black-brown. It stood a bit apart from the others, in a corner of the hall where the lighting was dimmer. Perfect. I looked around, made sure no one was nearby, and opened the left door. It smelled of wood and something new, lifeless inside. I climbed in, pulling my legs up, and pulled the door shut, leaving a tiny crack to see through. My heart was pounding with excitement. I was invisible. I was the king of hide and seek. The silence inside the wardrobe was different from that in the hall. It was thick, oppressive, absorbing all sound. I could only hear my own breathing and the distant muffled hum of the store. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Where was Eli? Had he given up? I was getting bored. I was just thinking about giving myself up when I heard a new sound. It wasn't the quick patter of children's feet. These were heavy, measured, almost lazy footsteps of an adult. Shuff, shuff, shuff. They were getting closer. I pressed against the crack, expecting to see Eli's puzzled face, or at worst, a security guard who would politely ask me to come out. But it wasn't Eli, and it wasn't a security guard. A man, tall, thin, in a plain dark blue hoodie and worn-out jeans. His face was pale and expressionless, but that's what was most frightening. It was empty, like a blank sheet of paper. He walked slowly down the aisle, his eyes methodically scanning the furniture. He wasn't looking for something specific. He was checking. And then I heard it. A soft, monotonous whisper. It was too quiet to make out words, but the rhythm was clear, insistent, like a skipping record. He was repeating something, over and over. Suddenly, he stopped a couple of meters from my wardrobe. My heart froze. He turned his head and looked directly in my direction. I thought our eyes met through the narrow slit. I flinched back deeper into the wardrobe, pressing against the back panel, clamping my hand over my mouth to not make a sound. I could hear the blood pounding in my temples. The footsteps sounded again, closer now. Shuff, shuff. They stopped right in front of my wardrobe. I could see the vague shadows of his feet under the door. The whole world had shrunk to this tiny space, to the smell of particle board and the sound of my own terror. He didn't open the door. Instead, I heard a quiet, almost gentle scraping sound. I risked crawling back to the crack and looking with one eye. He was standing with his side to me, running his fingers over the surface of the neighboring wardrobe, studying its texture. His whisper became slightly louder. I could make out a fragment of a phrase. Nothing superfluous, only order. It was inhuman. This wasn't a search for a lost child. This was a ritual. Then he turned and took a step towards my mom. His hand slowly reached for the handle of my door. Time slowed down. I could already see the crack widening and his empty face appearing in the opening. "Hey you, boy, are you in there?" A loud, authoritative voice called out from the other end of the hall. The man's hand froze an inch from the handle. He didn't flinch, didn't startle. He just stopped. Slowly, like a wind-up doll, he lowered his hand and turned his head towards the sound. A store security guard appeared from behind a shelving unit, a large man in uniform with a serious face. "This kid's mom is worried," the guard said, his gaze sliding over the man without much interest, then falling on my wardrobe. "Come on out. Hide and seek is over." The man in the hoodie stood for a second, staring into space, and then, without a word, turned around and walked away with the same measured step, deeper into the hall towards the emergency exit, and disappeared around the corner. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. "I heard you. Come on out," the guard repeated in a softer tone, tapping on the door of my wardrobe. Only then did I tumble out, trembling all over, barely able to stand. I only saw the guard's back and the empty aisle where that man had just been standing. "Are you okay?" The guard frowned, seeing my condition. I couldn't say anything, just nodded, trying to force back the sobs rising in my throat. He took me to my mom. Eli was already there. He had found her himself, scared that he couldn't find me. Mom scolded me for being gone so long, but seeing my pale face, decided I had just scared myself, getting lost. I didn't tell them anything. What words could describe that whisper, that empty face? It would have just been a weird man. The adults wouldn't have understood. We left. I tried to forget. The years passed. I grew up, went to university, got married. I became a rational, logical person who believes in facts, not childhood fears. And then, last week, I was working on an old case involving land ownership rights, where that very mega-home shopping center once stood. It had burned to the ground about 10 years ago. While browsing digitized archives of the local newspaper from that period, I came across a short article on page 3. The headline read, "Mega Home Mystery, Third Disappearance Remains Clueless." The article, dated 1 year after my visit, listed names. Sarah Jacobs, 9 years old. Michael Thompson, 7 years old. Liam O'Connor, 10 years old. They had all disappeared in Mega Home on different Saturdays, all while playing hide-and-seek with siblings, all in the remote, less visited halls of the store. Their bodies were never found. The case had gone cold. I leaned back in my chair, and an icy chill ran through me. It wasn't a coincidence. That man wasn't just strange. He was a hunter. His whisper, his methodical inspection of the wardrobes. He was searching. He was collecting. The security guard saved my life. His timely appearance had interrupted the hunt, but those 3 other children, they weren't so lucky. I still sometimes wake up at night, and it feels like I'm back in that wardrobe. I smell the wood and hear the quiet, insistent whisper from behind the door. Nothing superfluous, only order. And I understand that the most terrifying kind of horror isn't ghosts or demons. It's the utterly real, empty eyes of a person for whom you are just a thing to be found and placed in their collection. And he's still out there. Story 3. Hello everyone, my name is David Morrison. I'm writing this because I hope this story will make someone more vigilant. This isn't your typical scary story. This happened to me, my wife Sarah, and our 6-month-old son Luke. We bought our house in Maine a little over a year ago. An old 2-story Victorian-style an architect's dream, which is what I am. It was sold after the death of its owner, a certain Arthur Clayton. The agent said he was a loner, had no relatives left, and the house was sold off to cover debts. We were thrilled. Luke's nursery was my personal project. I did the renovations myself, painted it myself, assembled the furniture myself. I installed the baby monitor, a Motorola, with night vision and a motion sensor personally, positioning it to see the entire perimeter of the room, especially the crib. The first month was perfect. Then the night shadows began. The first time I saw it, I had gotten up for a drink of water. The phone on the nightstand vibrated softly. A notification. Motion detected. On the screen, a black and white image of Luke's room, and on the wall, right by his crib, a clear, blurry shadow of a person. Tall, thin. I froze. My heart sank. I rushed upstairs, burst into the room. No one. The window was closed. Luke was asleep. I checked the closet, looked under the crib. Empty. Sarah, awakened by my running, said I was imagining things, that it was probably a shadow from the moon or a passing car, but it happened again. The next night, and again. Always between 2 and 2:30 a.m. Always the same shadow. It just stood there, motionless. I started saving the recordings. I rewatched them 10 times over. The shadow didn't move. It was just there, like part of the decor. I told Sarah. We argued. She accused me of paranoia, said I was working myself up because of my job. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a firmware glitch? I reinstalled the camera's software. Nothing. Maybe a cobweb? I cleaned the lens. The shadow returned. I turned the camera off at night and woke up from anxiety, unable to sleep, listening for every sound. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. A notification. 2:18 a.m. I opened the app. The shadow was in place. But this time, something was different. I saw the shadow of a hand blurry, shapeless, slowly, almost ceremoniously, extend from the main silhouette towards Luke. It didn't touch him, just hovered an inch above his sleeping body. Something snapped in me. It wasn't fear anymore, but rage. A deaf, blind rage. I didn't just jump out of bed, I erupted. I grabbed not a baseball bat, but a heavy metal flashlight from the garage. I didn't run upstairs, I flew, taking 3 steps at a time. I didn't open the nursery door. I smashed it open with my shoulder, slamming it against the wall. I turned on the light. I was screaming, "Come out, you bastard!" Luke started crying. The room was empty. Sarah, frightened, stood in the doorway. "David, you've lost your mind. There's no one here." But I had seen the recordings. I knew I wasn't crazy. The next morning, I took Sarah and Luke to her sister's. I told her we had wiring problems and it wouldn't be safe. A lie. But I knew I had to finish this. Alone. I returned to the quiet, empty house. My first target was the wall where the shadow fell. I cleared everything out of the room. The crib, the dresser, the chair. I bared the floor and the walls. I tapped on the drywall, searching for hollow spots, and I found one, right behind the spot where the linen closet, which was original to the room, stood. The sound was dull, solid, but in one corner hollower. I moved the closet. It was incredibly heavy. Behind it were the same wallpapers as in the whole room. But upon closer inspection, I saw a faint rectangular outline. I ran a knife along it. A light press, and the blade went through. It wasn't a wall, but a thin layer of plywood covered with wallpaper. My hands were shaking. I inserted a crowbar into the crack and pulled. There was an ugly sound of tearing wood. Behind the plywood gaped blackness, not just a cavity in the wall, but a neat vertical passageway wide enough for a person. It smelled of dust, old wood, and something else. Mustiness, sweat. Taking the flashlight, I stepped inside. It wasn't just a gap between walls. It was a whole network. Narrow corridors leading to different parts of the house. A staircase descending behind the walls of the first-floor living room. And right behind the nursery was a room, about 2 by 2 meters, and it was inhabited. A sleeping bag on the bare floor, a folding gas burner, empty tin cans neatly stacked in a corner, water canisters, a waste bucket, and a wall covered in photographs and drawings. The photographs were old, from the 80s and 90s. They showed the same man, thin, with sad eyes. He was in this house. He was painting the fence, sitting on the porch, Arthur Clayton, and next to them, drawn with a pencil with a sickening photographic accuracy, were us, me, leaving for work, Sarah, watering the flowers in the garden, and Luke. Dozens of drawings of Luke. He was sleeping. He was eating. He was playing in his playpen. He was lying on the changing table. The last drawing was dated the previous night. It depicted that very scene, the shadow reaching out its hand. But the most terrifying thing was in the corner. There was a folder. In it were official documents. Adoption applications from various agencies dated 20 years ago, stamped everywhere with denied reasons, unstable financial situation, unsatisfactory housing conditions, failed psychological evaluation. Among the papers was a medical report, diagnosis, infertility, psychotherapy recommended. This wasn't just a squatter. This was Arthur Clayton, the former owner, a man who had lost everything, the hope for a family, his home, and he had returned to his only refuge, and our son. Our son had become his obsession, the embodiment of his unfulfilled dream. He didn't mean him harm. He was caring for him, stood by his crib like a guard, like the ghostly father he never got to be. I called the police. They set up a stakeout. They caught him that same night when he tried to enter the house through his passage from the basement. He didn't resist. When they led him away, he was calm. He just turned and looked at me, and he said, he didn't cry. I made sure he was okay. We weren't in the house for 2 weeks. We hired specialists who opened up all the walls. It turned out Arthur had spent years, while still the legal owner, building this network of passages, preparing a refuge for himself in case everything finally fell apart, and it had. We sold the house, moved to a new building with an open floor plan, where there isn't a single unnecessary wall, but I still can't sleep. Every night I check the camera in Luke's room. It's always empty, but I now know that the scariest monsters aren't the ones that come from the other world. They are born from human despair, from broken lives and shattered hopes, and they can live for years within the walls of your home, breathing your air, watching your happiness, which was stolen from them. And that thought is far more terrifying than any shadow.